So, about 2 years ago, I had this great idea, or I thought it was a great idea. Everyone I told it to thought I was completely nuts, but I'll let you judge for yourself. Wait, can we go back? There we go. This isn't one of those yay Canada stories. In fact, the stereotype of the lazy, complacent Canadian suits me better than any idea of the true North strong and free. But that's kind of the point. There's so much difference and so much distance. Is indifference the only thing that connects us as one country? After all, BC hates Ontario, the prairies hate BC, Quebec hates everyone, and the Maritimes are just ignored until someone starts making Newfie jokes. Now, I've spent time in all of these regions, and I can't help but wonder why Canada isn't actually 4, 5, or even 6 different countries. So, looking for an answer to that question, I did the only reasonable thing I could do. I quit my job, I left my apartment, I parked my car, and I bought a Greyhound pass. Now, I'm no politician or historian. The answers I sought were my own. That doesn't mean it wasn't an ambitious quest. I set out to find answers that I could tell through my stories. 49 parallels. And after seeing so much of this unwieldy large country, I gotta say, we live in a pretty spectacular place. I think traveling around Canada is something every Canadian should do. And this is my attempt to bring that experience to the rest of you. But I'll talk about that in a minute. First, let me tell you a bit about myself. I make comics, as you might have guessed. And most of my comics are about me, as you might have guessed. And I grew up in a family of artists. I've been reading comics for about as long as I can remember, so it makes sense that I would end up here. But there's something that always bothered me growing up around artists, is that none of them ever seemed like the artists you see on TV or in movies. That idiot savant, the freaky artist type who's just kind of talking in non sequiturs, seems to be on a completely different level from everyone else, almost oblivious to the world around them. So at some point I decided that's the kind of artist I want to be. So I started going to movies at the independent cinema, listening to music that sounded like noise to everyone else, reading novels that were virtually incomprehensible. And the worst part of it was that no matter how much of this I did, as far as I could tell, I never got any weirder. I was still just normal, ordinary, boring old me. Nothing changed as far as I could tell. So I kind of gave up on that. I went back to doing what I was doing, making art. I went to art school, which was also a pretty spectacularly disappointing experience on the freak contingent. And then I started making comics. And every once in a while, I even had the privilege of being paid for those comics. Here's one. Trevor. Oh, hey Marjan. How's it going? Not bad. What are you doing? You know, drawing. But isn't your page getting wet? No. Well, okay then, as long as you're having a good time, weirdo. When this was in print, the editors decided to give it a title. I didn't know about that until I saw the magazine. The title was Creative Types. And it took me a while to realize just how appropriate that title was, because creative types, we do that. We get so focused on this idea of the art that we're creating that it becomes our priority. It becomes more important than personal concerns. Art is more important than the artist. And we just become totally oblivious to the world around us. The idiot savant. So my teenage dream had come true. But there's sort of a flip side to that. Once you start developing these kind of separate concerns, it gets harder and harder to maintain that connection with sort of the average concerns of most people. Here's another example of what I'm talking about. Don't you think it's weird that superheroes never have shitty jobs like this in real life? What do you mean? They've got jobs. Superman's got a job, that newspaper. Yeah, but they all have the really cool jobs, though. Superman's a reporter, Spider-Man's a photographer, Bruce Wayne's a millionaire playboy, and that's the best job there is. Yeah, okay. So? Well, you never see a superhero who goes back to his job at the local grocery store. It's not fair. They all have these great jobs that don't require long hours with flexible schedules. It's just not realistic, you know? Dude, it's a comic book. How realistic is it supposed to be anyway? I just want to see a superhero with the same shitty job that I have. When am I going to see a superhero who can't go stop the villain because he's got to work a shift till close at Walmart? That would be real. You're an idiot. Separate concerns. Even beyond what's here, there's another level to this that most people who have read this, who I've talked to about this strip, they don't notice another thing that was going on in my head at this point. I know, you know, superheroing, dressing up in tights, fighting crime, all of that stuff. People don't do this. I'm not that disconnected yet. But if they did, it would fall into the same category as writer or freelance photographer or cartoonist. So I know a little bit about what I'm talking about. It's something you do for passion, not for pay. You do it because it's your dream. You're following your dream. Splitting that up into two dreams doesn't work. That's like saying, I'm going to make my living as a stand-up comedian until someone starts to pay me for my classical music compositions, which is what I really want to do with my life. You don't do two. You can really only do one. So that's what's unrealistic to me about superheroes. But getting back to this, here's the important part right here. All the details in the background of this panel. Visiting every province and every territory, stopping in small towns and big cities, couch surfing, meeting strangers, having conversations, collecting stories. That was my main concern on this project. And when I explained this to people, most people I talked to just could not understand how I could do this, how I could just leave everything behind without a plan. If I was going to travel around, at the very least, I should have hotels booked in every stop I was going to make before I got on the road. A job lined up waiting for me at the end of the road. Why was I leaving behind the life that I had to travel around on some crapshoot idea that might never earn me a dime? I needed a plan. What people didn't understand was that I had a plan, just that that wasn't it. My plan was to be open to the random happenstance that I might come across on the road. Being convinced in Invermere, BC, that Nelson was a town I shouldn't miss. Being told in Prince Rupert that it's worth the cost of the overnight ferry ride out to Haida Gwaii to experience life there for a few days. Having so fluid a plan allowed me to add those things into my trip and to see more of the country, to see parts of Canada that I hadn't thought to go visit before I had gotten on the road. And even when I explained that to people, I would still get just this blank stare and, what are you, nuts? So, separate concerns. Again, I was playing the idiot savant. I could not communicate what my priorities were to the average person and why those priorities were worth having. But this doesn't apply just to artists. These separate concerns exist in all sorts of walks of life, and there were people I met on the road who were just as confusing to me as I seem to be to most people when I explain this project. And in some cases, there were whole towns of people whose separate concerns just made no sense to me. Like my first stop, North Bay, Ontario. Through a mix-up with the bus schedule, I ended up there in the middle of the night. Thankfully, there were cabs waiting at the bus station. So I got in the cab, and I asked the cabbie about what I should do while I was in town. And he said flatly, "There's nothing to do here, it's North Bay." So then I got to the hotel, and the motel owner was nice enough to come out in his pajamas and give me a room key. And I asked him the same thing, and he said, "There's nothing to do here, it's North Bay." So I got the rest of a night's sleep, and I wandered downtown, and I went into a diner and ordered my breakfast and asked the waitress. She told me the same thing. "There's nothing to do here. It's North Bay." So, page 2, I finish my breakfast, and I go up to the counter to pay, and I ask the cashier the same thing, and she tells me, "There's nothing to do here. It's North Bay." Fortunately, a girl who was sitting at the counter joined into the conversation, and between the two of them, they had jogged their memories and remembered that there was the Midway going up on the waterfront. So I headed straight for the waterfront, and I must have walked up and down there for about an hour and a half, and I never did find the Midway. And then the next day, I was all packed up, I was leaving town, I was waiting for my bus. I went to get a coffee and got talking to the girl behind the counter, and I explained my project to her, and she realized I had deliberately decided to stop in that town. And so she looked at me and she said, "But there's nothing to do here. It's North Bay." It was amazing to me that these people, this whole town, seemed to take so much of their surroundings for granted. They were so used to their idea of normal that they were equating normal with ordinary, with boring, and they couldn't understand why anyone outside of their town would want to visit their town. And it made me wonder why any of them wanted to stay. So we develop our own sense of what is normal. And like I said, they saw their normal as boring. Fortunately, the confused reaction I'm often greeted with when I talk about my normal reminds me that what I'm doing is something unique to me, and is far from boring. I am very fortunate to have developed my own sense of normal, which included visiting a new town every 2 or 3 days. And my normal included hiking the coastline of Haida Gwaii alone in the rain with 120-kilometer-per-hour winds, which is probably not the smartest thing, but it was fun and a beautiful sight. My normal has included traveling the Yukon in the middle of February. And it's been great. It's the most important thing in the world to me has been learning that normal doesn't have to mean ordinary. Thank you.